Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome to you wherever you're dialing in from. It's a very, very hot morning in March in a very sunny Gloucestershire here today. I'm Lawrence Webb, President of IOSH, and I'm really happy to see you all at this Divergent Thinking webinar, which is part 2 of a 4-part series. So for those of you who attended our first session, welcome back. Great to see you. Thanks for coming. For those of you who are new to the series, it's great to see you joining the others. So as a reminder, in part 1 of the series, we drilled down into just what neurodiversity is, the language we use, and the importance of understanding both misconceptions and preconceptions associated with neurodivergence. And I'll add here that that session was recorded, so it's available to any of you that want to either watch it again or watch it for the first time through the IOSH website or the IOSH YouTube channel. So if you haven't had a chance to watch it yet, I urge you to check that out because it was a great foundation for the rest of this series. And the link for that will be posted to you in the chat box that you'll be able to see in a moment. So that was part 1. And it's worth saying in parts 3 and 4, we'll look more closely at divergent thinking from the perspective of the employer, but also the employee. But today's session, we're going to be looking at influencing people at early stages of their careers. Whether you're neurodivergent or not, we'll be exploring how best to support and get the most out of those we work with, and demystifying the stigma attached with neurodiversity, and in turn give confidence to our neurodivergent future leaders. So it's an absolute pleasure for me today to be joined by 2 people, one of whom I know particularly well, but I know them both. I've had the pleasure of working with them on and off for some time. So maybe I could ask Emily to come off video and perhaps introduce yourself and let people know where you are and what you do.
Hi everyone, so yes, my name's Emily Castle. I work for Lawrence actually at Costain Group, and I'm the Group Safety, Health and Environment Performance and Improvement Manager there. I actually also, along with a couple of colleagues, helped to set up our Disability and Wellbeing Network, and we've been making some changes throughout Costain to try and improve our inclusion for neurodiversity and other disabilities. I don't live very far from Lawrence either. I'm in sunny Warwick and absolutely roasting.
Well, we shouldn't complain because we spend most of our time saying isn't the UK weather awful, and when it becomes really good we complain that it's too good. So
it's very true. It is hot.
Yeah. So thanks for coming today, Emily. Really appreciate it. And I know you're going to give some fantastic insights, but we also have Adam Gawne here with us, who is one of our future leader community, very active, no doubt. Some of you have seen him on LinkedIn and other places, especially within the last year or so, associated with the IOSH Future Leaders community. So Adam, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, thank you so much, Lawrence. My name is Adam Gawne. I'm a health, safety and environment advisor at a housing association in the Northeast. As Lawrence has already introduced me there, I've been part of IOSH for a little bit of time now as part of the steering group for the Future Leaders community. I've just ended my term on that, so I've had 2 wonderful years working alongside lots of people, which is fantastic. And yeah, I'm here just to share my experience and answer obviously some questions based on my approach and how things have gone for myself. Just to add as well that I do define myself as and I am defined as neurodivergent. I do have dyslexia. I was diagnosed in 2009. So from my perspective, it has been a learning and it has been a journey through all of that.
Absolutely. Well, again, thank you for being here, Adam. And after the conversations we've had over that period, again, I know you're going to bring loads of value to this. So again, thanks both for being here. But let's sort of jump straight into some questions that we've got for you both. And perhaps Emily, if I can come to you first. I guess it would be understandable that for neurodivergent people coming into new roles, there may be a sort of a wariness or an uncomfortableness about being upfront with employers or colleagues for fear of being, treated differently. And when starting out in a new role, but also perhaps for young professionals embarking on their careers, how important do you think it is that people are honest and upfront with their employers about their conditions?
I think it's really, really important. So I waited 8 years to tell Costain that I was neurodivergent, and actually within those 8 years I was struggling a lot. I'd needed a lot of help. I'd had software previously that I to be honest, I needed it. But equally, it's really important to understand that you are in control of when you tell someone. There is no obligation for you to actually tell your employer that you have a neurodivergent condition at all. That being said, if you are honest, you will be able to get the support you need. You will actually be able to then be working to your best potential. And so overcoming that is really, really difficult. And I do really understand that, because I had to overcome it as well. But yeah, the honesty, it's not about being honest. You're just sharing a part of yourself, and it's being able to do that within that workplace. And if that workplace maybe doesn't feel like it's going to let you do that, then maybe that's not the place for you. But yeah, you are not obligated to, and I think that's really important. 73% of people with neurodivergent conditions don't share that with anyone. And that is a really high number that we need to bring down, I think.
No, absolutely. No, and I couldn't agree more. I mean, Adam, anything that you would sort of add based on your personal experience?
Yeah, very similar to Emily, and sort of, the idea of actually sort of saying to someone that I am neurodivergent and that I have this condition, or that I think differently. I think it sort of puts almost label on yourself, because I think people will automatically go, oh, I know what they're going to be like, so they'll be like this. And that's quite a difficult one to sort of break down barriers. I wouldn't necessarily say, you always face discrimination with it, but I think there is a stereotype or stereotypical picture that people do form when you sort of say, your condition or who you are and how you sort of cope with it. And it is very much a personal journey, and it's one that, you can be quite brave with. So as soon as you fill in an application form as part of the EDI sort of monitoring, you can start to feel confident by writing it down on paper sometimes. And although that might not necessarily get to the hiring manager or the person who's recruiting, it's used for a very different purpose. That opening up to the organization can sort of be quite cathartic, so that you sort of go, actually, I am ready to share. Or if you're not, then it's the point that you are then able to do that. So I think that's the other part of it, is that organizations shouldn't just have it so that at the start of your employment that you actually then sort of disclose. It should be an opportunity throughout, that actually, through one-to-ones or kind of just a catch-up, that you can actually then open up and say, actually, I am struggling, as Emily kind of mentioned there, and how she then, was able to sort of start that conversation. Whereas I've sort of embraced it as much as I can now, because I don't want to seem as if it's going to let me down, or it's this huge part of me is going to make me fail. So I've started to really embrace it from the point of interview and the recruitment, and actually sort of saying, this is who I am. So, I just want to make you aware. It doesn't make me any less. It doesn't make me any different. It just means there's some sort of change that's going to have to happen. And I want to work with you, as Emily also said there, to be the best. I don't want to be defined in any way. I want to do the job, and I know I can do the job. I just need these little changes, please.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And it's interesting what you're sort of both alluding to here, and you've actually said it yourself, Adam, is the aspect of the fact that this is actually an opportunity. It's an opportunity for the employee and the employer to actually benefit from all that potential that could be missed or failed to be unlocked. And this is very much what we were talking about in the first session, and we're definitely going to come back to it in the following two sessions. But if I sort of stay with you, Adam, then I'll come back to Emily. I mean, following on from what you've just said, then, do you have any advice on how that conversation could be approached then to get things going?
Yeah, and again, it's a personal sort of experience rather than, one that I can say is 100% going to work for everyone. But I think for me, it's knowing, who you are, what support you do require, and sort of the coping mechanisms, and sharing these, and just sort of, really just sort of saying, I can do this job, but I just need these other little adjustments. And it could be software, it could be, color overlays, it could be a different sort of monitor or screen, things like that, depending on the role that you're doing. But what I've found is no one's gone, no, that's not going to happen. That is definitely something that I can't do for you. And I think what's then made me sort of go, oh, actually, I can have more of these conversations because the reaction has been positive. And I guess, as Emily's also said there, it's about if you don't get that response, then potentially you've got to kind of question, well, actually, was this right? Or do I need to move on to somewhere else potentially? And it is a confidence growing thing. Again, you know, my diagnosis in 2009 is been, you know, for nearly 15 years now. So I've kind of really understood a lot of what it is that makes me kind of tick and what I then need to do and then meet the employee as well. So I say it's I don't think there's a science to it. I don't think there's a sort of fundamental way of saying it, but I think it's just about those things that are important to you. So share them and just start that conversation.
Yeah, of course. I mean, Emily, I'm sure you'd back that up, and I know from our day jobs that, you know, you've worked with people about having these conversations before. I mean, would you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, we've done a massive thing in Costain, and Adam's mentioned it a little bit about, you know, on forms we always ask for us to disclose a disability or whatever, and we've actually changed that within Costain to sharing. Just changing some simple language can make it seem so much better. I mean, disclose kind of, you know, you think you're disclosing something really horrid. It's just like this big thing, whereas actually sharing is what we're doing. You're asking us to share ourselves with you. I do think Adam and I are in a really fortunate position. We both knew what help and support we needed. Some people don't, and that can then be requirement of assessments and things like that. But the questions that you should be asking as a line manager is things like, you know, what works well for you, what time of day are you working best, what are you finding easy, what are you finding difficult, and those kind of questions will help us as well be able to answer and build them. What you shouldn't be doing is going in and going, yes, I understand dyslexia or dyspraxia, and I've got a brother whose sister's child is that, and so therefore I understand this completely, because you won't, because that's not how it works. So you need to be asking questions and be really unafraid of asking them. We will answer, and if we don't like the question you've asked, we'll ask you to rephrase it differently. But it should be a really open discussion. Nobody should be going into it with any preconceptions, and it should happen when both parties sort of are feeling more comfortable. Like Adam was suggesting, one-to-ones, things like that would be when I would do that. But yeah, the more open the question, the better.
Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good advice. I mean, just coming back to you then, Adam, I mean, thinking about, you know, we're talking here about experience you've had, experience that Emily's had as sort of professionals coming into roles and the likes, but what would you say for those who are looking to make the transition from, say, education into work? Because that's quite a big step. I mean, I remember when I finished my sort of first degree and you thought, right, okay, so here we go then, and you step into the workplace. And I remember the transition from school into college and then college into university, and it being very different each time and you having to calibrate. But what about if you're coming from education into work and all of a sudden you find yourself in this situation? I mean, do you think it makes a difference, or would you think about it differently, or what?
No, I think it's one of the most probably stressful sort of times in your sort of early career and life, to be honest. I think, you know, we are quite cushioned all the way sort of through school and education that there's an expectation you do X, you get to Y, you get to Z. Yeah. But when we transition from education into the workplace, again, it depends on the sort of role that you're going for, the environment, the stresses, the triggers, all different things at the same time. And it is a difficult one to adjust to, you know, and there's a lot of factors that kind of come into it. But I think one of the things is, again, it comes back to how prepared you are with kind of just knowing, you know, what it is that you can sort of provide and using that as a basis and your strength, really, because at the end of the day, you know, we've all got different sort of spectrum of our conditions or diagnoses. There isn't to say that as soon as you are diagnosed as ADHD, you are going to be like this and therefore you will fulfill that role. And I think for me and for when I've seen it with others, is that environments are quite kind to us actually as well. So again, it's sort of seeing the positives of that and building on all of that, and then again working with others in the environment, because there is more than likely others who again have started off very similar to you, and that they can sort of do some sort of support buddying. And that's going to really help you get into the workplace and find that flexibility, and then, hopefully move on to a very successful career. But I think one of the things that is probably a failure of higher education or education is that we're not necessarily prepared. We're told about what the working world will be like, but we're not necessarily kind of shown it, or it's not demonstrated through the work that we will do or study. So there's probably more work that needs to be done there, which employers could work with institutions on. But obviously that's maybe a national government sort of initiative.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's certainly a part of the process I'm going through with my daughter at the moment, who's 22 and has autism, and she's finding that next step is something that she keeps trying to avoid, because it is just such a massive step for her personally. But she's working with the college that she's in, plus a number of local employers in Warwick, and as you say, Adam, they've been actually very open and welcoming, and can absolutely see the opportunity that will actually come with supporting her on that journey. So that sort of opportunity just keeps coming up as a word that makes complete sense. But I'm going to come to you, Emily, because we've actually spoken about this next question before. I mean, what advice would you give someone who's discussed their condition with an employer, but is not being supported, or worse, is actually being discriminated against as a result of that conversation? And what would you do?
Yeah, and unfortunately that does happen, because again, people aren't really sure about neurodiversity, what it means, the spectrum of neurodiversity, and so you do kind of end up, I've had it where I've been patronized and been treated like a child, and I'm like, no, I am okay, I just need you to help me, and what you're doing right now isn't. That being said, you do have the Equality Act to back you up here. The Equality Act does exist, and it cover neurodivergent. And so if the employer is not, you can remind them that under their responsibilities under the Equality Act, they should be supporting you as you have requested. And one of the other things that I quite often find, this is happening because people are expecting big sums of money that they now need to support this individual. People don't realise that most reasonable adjustments, or workplace adjustments as we call them in Costain, are actually only £75. Or a lot of them with neurodiversity you can actually do for free. And so trying to explain that to people could really help you if you're saying, well, actually, I'm not asking for you to pay anything, I'm just asking for some support. The problem with that being is that everything I've just suggested is all on that individual, and that is one of the big things about a difference such as neurodiversity, is we are often having to advocate and fight for ourselves. So it would be really good if you could get someone to help you within the business who's going to support you and be your voice as well. I know Lawrence has done that for me a lot, just so that you're not a single voice, and you're not trying to work on your own. Because that, of course, can add stress, which can then deteriorate mental health. But yeah, it would be just making sure that they actually really understand what you're asking, and have not assumed that it's just too difficult because it's going to cost a lot of money, which is actually where it tends to boil down to.
Okay, great, thank you. Adam, any thoughts?
Yeah, I think it's just what Emily kind of mentioned there. I think it's about kind of really sort of pointing out that it isn't anything that you're asking for is unreasonable. It's very much just about, again, if you want the best out of myself, you want the best out of the work that I can produce, then these are adjustments that are going to kind of be required. And that, I think the other part of it is just understanding where others in the organization are very similar to yourself or in a similar position, and how you can kind of work together to sort of advocate for change potentially as well, and look at the kind of policies and procedures as well, and that underpin the organization, and really kind of get it on the radar as being something that needs to change and can change. It's not suggesting, go on strike and do anything particularly like that, but I think it's about kind of just being a force of good nature, and sort of actually the positive change that will come from it will be amazing for all members of staff, those who potentially aren't who are undiagnosed or aren't aware of, conditions, and then suddenly go, oh, actually, that could be me. They'll kind of see that, and that'll be something hopefully which allows them an opportunity to kind of then voice up and sort of say. I think one of the difficulties is that potentially an organization, will just automatically put on sort of like the blinker and sort of, want to kind of just sort of go, oh no, we can't deal with it right now. We've got all these other things. But it is a here and now for us. We can't be in the future either. We kind of need to be in the present as well. So there's that kind of issue that might kind of come out potentially, and it's an unintentional one as well, I think, rather than it being an intentional one.
Yeah, and that's a really interesting point actually, about being sort of, you being in the now rather than people to talk about the can being kicked down the road because it's in the difficult box or whatever. Well, actually, that doesn't solve anything for anybody. They might think that's a temporary solution to something they're gonna have to manage properly and correctly, as rightly they should. But for you as the individual left sort of exactly the same place as you were before, that's absolutely no good whatsoever. And I mean, it's interesting in some of the things that you've just said. You started to allude a little bit to what employers can actually do to make a workplace a comfortable environment for neurodivergent staff to actually thrive. I mean, do you want to expand on what you just said a little bit more, Adam, and then I'll come across to you, Emily. What should we do to make that environment more comfortable?
Yeah, and I think it's about kind of the openness, as you said already, Lawrence, about kind of actually embracing it. And I think, for most of us, we obviously need to start by listening, and particularly in the health and safety profession and a lot of other professions, to be fair. We've got to be the ones to listen, to then understand, to then empathize, and then actually kind of work with others to put things in place. So then there's kind of that plan, do, check, act that kind of comes back into it, our management system of, health and safety. It's very similar to all aspects of our life and work anyway. So, what is it that we're going to look at? How are we going to actually do that? Then what's the process of doing it? Then how do we check that we're doing it right? And I think things like that will really kind of help. And I think, we've got to be brave and understand we're not going to get it necessarily right at the first time, and that's understandable. But as long as we've done as much as we can to try and make it right, we learn from it and then try to improve more, then, absolutely, that is just the way forward. And I think, personally, if that was the approach that an organization took, I would feel really supported and happy about it, because I sort of think they're trying and they're able to see things. But the other part of that is, right, do they need more learning? Do they need more training? That can really kind of come into it and, provide that then framework really that can help it grow.
Now, again, interesting. Certainly some of the work we've done within my day job on the allyship activities, it's been very much about helping people get over that first hurdle of, I'm really worried that I do or say something wrong, but actually it's better to be in that place and be learning and be improving than not do anything and sort of put, as you say, put the blinkers on. That's absolutely the worst thing that can happen. Emily, any other experiences that you can share about making the workplace more comfortable?
Yeah, I mean, there's, like Adam was just leading to, training and awareness. I think that's really, really important. One thing I always say, and it's the simplest thing in the world, is whenever you send out a meeting invitation, ask what adjustments people need. Because you always ask for dietary requirements. You always, particularly if the meeting's in person, you're not going to ask for dietary requirements. If they're online, you can deal with themselves. But if the meeting's in person, you're always asking for dietary requirements. Why not ask for adjustments as well? And actually, suddenly that's very inclusive for us, because I might say quite often, well, I need the presentation in advance, or you need to sit me near the front, or, it's a 3-hour meeting, you need to put some breaks in it because you're not going to get my attention for that long. And all of those are adjustments. And because I've been asked it, I'm willing to respond. But we don't normally, no one's going to go and actively do that without that question in there. There's also the option of looking into things like access to work, because they will help you understand some of the adjustments. That's a government funded program. It subsidises adjustments that require cost to them. It can also help with providing adjustments at interview. And if you don't know about access to work, definitely look into it, because it can really help you educate yourselves as a business, but also put adjustments in place that you won't have thought of. As making things as open as possible though. So for example, I've got loads of software on my computer. I need that software. That software is available for anybody to now order. So actually, if someone's really nervous about sharing a condition, they can still order supportive software without going through a whole, well, we need to tell HR this, we need to do this. And so it's making sure that you're open, that the company is actually talking about it, the company is verbalizing it, because that will make people feel more comfortable. And there will be a lot of people with neurodiversity who are undiagnosed. And so the more we change what we're doing to be open, to be more accepting, will help them as well, without, they won't necessarily need to go and seek diagnosis for that support.
Absolutely. I mean, one just building on that, one question we've been asked is if there was a situation of multiple neurodivergent members who sort of choose to reveal and then discuss their own situations in a way to sort of connect with others and support each other, would that be considered unprofessional? I mean, I have a view on this myself, but I'm interested to know what you think. Maybe Emily first.
So obviously, as someone who runs an employee network, I'm going to say it's not unprofessional. It's the most important thing. Absolutely. When I first started talking about being neurodivergent, I always say this: it often feels like I'm the one sticking my head above the parapet and I'm waiting to either be shot or told it's okay and I can come out. If there's more of you to help support that, you can discuss, you have ideas. Actually, we're a network of allies anyway, because each neurodivergent condition is different. So everybody is very different in how they learn, what they need, what support they need. So I'm always learning from everyone else in my network. I think it's really, really important. And then actually, as a company, you'll start to learn more because everybody's talking and being more open. Now, I do know that not every company is big enough or large enough to support an employee network in that way. So if it's a more informal network, that's also still fine. And that person is probably getting an awful lot out of it as a group to be talking and learning. Adam, absolutely. I know you've got some different experiences.
Yeah, and I think just one of them is that, absolutely, I agree that it should be considered unprofessional anyway. First of all, we form friendships across organizations often based on a common interest or, an area of work or activity. So to then suggest that we couldn't set anything up or you couldn't have, a group based on something so important to you as a neurodiverse condition, then that would be very, very odd in my mind. But I think there's a fine line between potentially where, help and support is then coming through, which may sort of, be the wrong help and support. So I think what we've got to always include is the employer in these groups and make them aware of, some of the things that are being discussed, not necessarily everything, because, again, these should be private, safe spaces for any employee who wants to kind of come along and join. But I think we've got to also respect that the employer is obviously there wanting us to do our jobs and do them the best that we can. So, and I think, there's other mechanisms, other policies in place through HR, which, sometimes you have to go to rather than just relying on a friend because they've got X, Y, or Z. And I think that's where it can become difficult. So I think, yeah, they are fantastic. And I would like to see all organizations, big and small, but like as Emily said, they can be difficult things. But one of the things that obviously does sort of help is that we can be online, we can be a bit more remote. So even if there is a meeting that's scheduled, again, what is it can be done to really make an adjustment just to allow others to kind of be there and still have a voice or an opportunity to discuss something? Because what we don't want is anybody sort of going, well, they're in the headquarters in HQ, they're all having these fancy meetings, but I'm on the sort of coal face and I can never get there because my diary is always full of these other things. But again, we can do more, and we can start to use technology really to its most advantage.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, as someone who at the moment believes himself to be neurotypical, but who knows? You know, I've found that my experience of working with the likes of yourselves and my daughter and others, and making this, you know, a really important principle of my year as president. I mean, it's just opened up a whole new way of thinking, and the sort of power that comes with that diversity and the importance of that inclusion, and thinking about you know, understanding what equity really sort of does look like, and how personal this is. And it's necessarily personal. It's just made me a better professional, but it's actually made me a better person, because my understanding and my view of the world has just expanded beyond belief. And I can't imagine a situation where any organization would want to stop people huddling together initially in a group to get things up and running and get that support going, but then to widen that out, because it's an absolute it's that opportunity word again. It really is for everybody, you know, involved. So yeah, so I mean, that's my view on it. And certainly working with Emily and the different employee networks we've got, they're immensely powerful and just really important to the people they support, but also to those people that they represent as supporters as well. And I think that's a really, really important point. So, okay, so we're going to take some questions from attendees in a second, but just one last one from me, Emily, if I can come back to you first. When you think about companies, and there's many of them now who are adopting specific neurodiversity hiring programs, what are your thoughts on this, and what do you think are other things that companies can do to support and then attract neurodiverse talent?
Yeah, I actually quite like the fact there's these neurodiversity specific hiring programs. I mean, that being said, you say a lot of companies, that's true. 53%, however, still don't have anything specific and have done no accommodations in their recruitment processes. So there's still quite a lot that haven't. The ones that have are ones that generally have really recognized the opportunities that being neurodivergent can bring to your company, the strengths, the creativity, different ways of thinking. So GCHQ is a big one, and they've always been a huge advocate for particularly people with neurodivergent conditions. That being said, I do think they do have to be a bit careful, because a lot of them then perpetuate this superpower narrative. And I do not like the superpower narrative, because what then happens is everyone assumes that you can work at that superpower all the time. And unfortunately, that's not how neurodiversity works. So it might work, but it's not going to work when we want it to work. It's not going to work when you want it to work. And there's other days where it won't work at all. And so the whole superpower narrative, a lot of neurodivergent people are trying to take back. So it is really, really good, but be really careful how you advertise it. In terms of what things other companies can do, is be really looking at their job description and job adverts and actually making sure they say what you need. Like, you know, so many times you read a job advert and it's just really wordy, you don't really know what it's asking for, and it's not actually asking for 100% what the job requires. So for neurodivergent people, it's really good if it's a really specific job description, because we will then understand it and be able to assess better whether we can do that job. So that's one thing you can do, making sure that, like I say, you can offering adjustments right the way through. I think Adam mentioned that earlier as well, adjustments right the way through from interview, really start trying to open that up. Being aligned with a company such as Disability Confident, which is sort of showing that you are actually going to be or have some knowledge and are looking at becoming disability confident. That can also be quite good for us to see on a label or something like that. One thing that we're looking at doing is actually getting into some of the groups at universities and colleges where they've got societies or groups for those with disabilities, and advertising specifically to them as well, to sort of really show that to our graduates that we're really likely and willing to support them as they require. So there's a lot that can be done. Not a lot of it is that complicated. Just requires a little bit of thinking. I mean, one of the big things that we always get is, can we send out questions in advance? I don't know why people are so scared of this, but that is a huge help that you can give to anybody who's neurodivergent. We did it for this webinar, which is very helpful for me, certainly. I'm sure Adam will say that it was helpful for him, but it was you can send interview questions in advance. Don't be afraid to do that. That will make a big difference to the people that are coming through.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Well, as Emily indicated, Adam, anything else to add on this final question?
Not hugely, but absolutely what Emily just said there about kind of, being able to have the questions in advance. I was absolutely terrified when I first asked, could I have the questions, not necessarily in advance, but it was, could I have the questions ready for me so that they were printed on a piece of paper when I got into the interview? And it wasn't about me trying to cheat the system. It wasn't about me trying to, try and go above others and sort of, do that. What it was is to try and diffuse the stress, because interviews, recruitment, all of that is very, very stressful. We look at jobs because we're often excited by the idea of working for an organization or in a particular role. So it's not that we're trying to, like say, sort of go, well, I'm going to get this job because I've got the questions, therefore I'm going to pass. It's more about, again, just having that ability to recheck and just sort of go, oh, did I hear that question correctly without having to ask 5 times? Could you repeat that question? Could you repeat that question? Because again, depending on your condition or who you are, it may go in, like particularly for me, it goes in one ear, comes out the next straight away. So having that was, and asking for that was, again, one of the things that I've sort of grown in confidence of. So if I could recommend that, it's again, as Emily said, about asking the question to people. Do you require the questions in advance? It doesn't mean, again, what you're looking for as an employer is the right person, not if they can answer a textbook question. That's the sort of difference of it all. And I think, as Emily said, they are really positive as long as they don't become a tick boxing exercise and sort of become something where,
the same thing.
Yeah, where it just becomes like, right, we've achieved this, we are doing this. And I think Emily, brilliantly said it as well about kind of organizations and, standards that you can kind of actually work towards or become partnered with. It just shows you as a responsible employer and actually an employer that is responding well. And actually the other part of it is that it's going to help health and well-being at the end of the day for the employee as well, because there's going to be elements of stress in all jobs, but actually you're taking away and you're chipping away at each bit. And that kind of just means that the person's able to do what they can.
Yeah, no, I think I'm really glad you made that point, because I was sitting there listening to what you both said. And I, on so many occasions, have seen somebody as an organisation or an individual doing something because it appears to be the right thing, or it's the current, what we would say in Costain, it's the current sort of shiny ball thing that everybody's chasing for whatever reason. You've absolutely got to stand by what it is you're setting out to do for the right reasons, and then support the people who are actually then willing to come forward and say, right, well, this is me, you're here for me, rather than, well, we've ticked that box. And then when that opportunity arises, all of a sudden there's no substance behind it. It's a tragedy. So I'm really glad you made that point. But let's come to some of we've got some brilliant questions in here that I've been flicking through. Paul Lindsay, good friend of mine, but thank you for coming along, Paul. I know this is an area that's important to your own heart. Hopefully we've actually given you some good things to think about there in terms of what could employers actually do to make them more neurodivergent friendly over and above a simple policy. And there's obviously going to be an employers focus webinar coming soon, but I want to come on to this particular question from Kurt to do with language. I mean, this is a great question. So what Kurt actually says, for those who perhaps can't see it, is I'm intrigued for you as neurodivergent people, what language works for you? Is it I have a condition, or is it I have a diagnosis, or I am neurodivergent? And Kurt says, I know some people who feel uncomfortable being referred to as having a condition versus, insert neurodivergent type. That's a great question. Go on, Emily. I can see the cogs whirring there.
Yeah, you know me too well. So it really depends on the individual. So I will always say I am neurodivergent, because actually, if I was to go, I have such and such, we'd be there for about 20 years, because I have dyspraxia, dyslexia, dyscalculia, and ADHD, and dysgraphia, and it just goes on. So for me, one of the really important things about neurodiversity that it's brought across is the understanding that conditions co-occurring is more normal than just a single one. So that is why a lot of people will say, I am neurodivergent, because it is just, it will encompass a myriad of the conditions, because they're not going to have just one of them. That being said, some people will prefer to just be I am or I have autism, or I have ADHD, because that, specifically if they're older, that will be what they were given as a child. They were given that one condition, because that is traditionally how we were diagnosed. I have no problem with the word diagnosed. There is also a whole separate discussion around person first language. So do you say someone with rather than a neurodivergent person? Again, that's really personal preference. And that's where I was saying earlier, it's really all about asking those questions and not being afraid to ask those questions, because particularly within disabilities as a whole now, not just neurodiversity, everybody will want to be something, have a different sort of language preference. So for me, it's I'm neurodivergent. Adam, I'm not actually sure what your preference is.
Yeah, Emily, and I think it's just something that you've just mentioned there. Like, so usually I would say, just for ease, probably just to say I am dyslexic, because again, that was what my diagnosis was when I went to see a psychologist as part of the process, and so that was what they sort of said, you are dyslexic. But I know fine well I'm also dyspraxic, which again comes back to what Emily said, that you never have one condition without having another sort of condition. I personally, again, and this comes back to what Emily said, I wouldn't be offended if someone sort of suggested the wrong sort of terminology. But again, if somebody asked me what would you prefer, then I would say, you know what, I respond to this, I am dyslexic, so that would be fine. If you want to refer to me as being dyslexic, that's absolutely fine. If you want to refer to me as being neurodiverse, again, that's absolutely fine. But I think if you go down some of these other sort of names, we need to then have some clarity in terms of, again, what Emily sort of mentioned about kind of how they work with other sort of conditions potentially. And again, it just takes time for you to sort of, you know, come to terms potentially, because I think one of the things that we've got to recognize is that we've had a privilege where we've been diagnosed, or, you know, the condition's been explained to us at a much earlier age than potentially some of the employees or workers who are currently going through that process. You know, again, in the organization I work with, I've met people who are in their 40s and 50s now, just finding out that, you know, they were autistic, and they've struggled for that many times, that I think, you know, again, if you tried asking them what would their preference be, I don't honestly know or think that they would have anything at this moment. But I think by asking the question of, so what would you prefer me to refer it as, or how would you like me to introduce it? It's just very just polite more than anything in itself.
And don't be afraid perhaps to ask that question, because, you know, it's going to put you in the right place, right?
No, and I will also say, you see, I have a disability, which some people with neurodiversity will get really, really upset about, because they don't believe they do. That being said, in certain situations I am disabled, and so therefore I have a disability. So it is really all about, like you just said, Lawrence, just really please don't be afraid to ask the questions.
Okay, brilliant. Well, listen, I mean, this is this. I mean, I could quite easily go on talking about this for hours, because for me, it's all just really useful foundation knowledge to be that better person, as I said earlier. But Sophia's actually asked, just building on and exactly what you've both just said, some people may not know or have an official diagnosis. So what should line managers do in these situations, especially if their direct report does not know? Well, I mean, what's best for them? That's a great question. Either of you?
I'll just pop in here. So for this one, I think in particular is that we must recognise that about 15 to 20% of the population are, you know, diagnosed with a condition, neurodiverse condition. So we're looking at 2 out of 10 people who will have some sort of, you know, main diagnosis, and then obviously have other conditions associated. And I think what it is sometimes recognising some of the traits that others may have, and then just asking the question. And this is how I was diagnosed, by someone just going, do you know you could be dyslexic because you've got certain things that were kind of, you know, showing. And I was like, oh, hold on a second. And then that's where the research came into it. That's when, I started to look into it more, and then I went forward and actually was diagnosed. And that was a breath of fresh air as a moment that someone actually cared, because they could see difficulties, they could see challenges, and they recognized it because they knew other people who had dyslexia. And I think as a line manager, that is one way that you could really try and support. Because again, you will likely have seen, and the more we have the conversation, the more it's going to be easier for this to happen, because obviously we need all the other kind of folk to kind of come forward first. But again, it comes back to these groups as well, that as managers, if you kind of aren't, you're not sure, go join a group and find out, educate yourself that little bit more, and then hopefully you then have a bit of an answer for them.
Yeah, 100%. That's certainly what I've personally gained through working with Emily, because Emily, your situation is different to my daughter's situation, but it's been really useful for me as a line manager to actually go through that process alongside Emily and understand what it actually means and what needs to be done, because obviously I can take that knowledge forward, and importantly, Emily, hopefully you've got what you need, I believe you have. Yep. For the day job. I mean, anything that you'd add to what Adam has just said?
Yeah, I mean, I think it is really important. Sometimes we don't know what's best for us. We do, but we'll have forgotten at the point you ask us the question. Certainly that's how my brain works anyway. So you might have to ask the questions that Adam was just talking about more than once, or raise the ideas more than once. But, certainly don't go around pointing fingers at people and going, I think you're this, because that will not help any situation. There are some things that you could do automatically that would, just incorporate anybody with neurodiversity without you even having to lift a finger or suggest anything. Things like always send out an agenda, always send out a presentation in advance, always send out actions after a meeting with the names and dates of finalized actions. Suddenly, a lot of neurodivergent stress at work's gone because someone else is doing that for them. So you could always take that on yourself. If you've started to recognize traits, just start to do that, and actually you're already being more inclusive. So that's a really simple 3 suggestions there that you can do that is inclusive for everyone, particularly if someone wasn't aware of a diagnosis they've got.
Yeah, and we'll certainly come back to these again in more detail in that future webinar. In fact, it'll probably be picked up by both the webinar for employees and the employer. But building on that, and maybe I'll come back to you first, Adam. Greg's asked, do you have any advice for task initiation for someone with ADHD when medication isn't an option yet due to being undiagnosed? Now, I mean, there's a sort of a bigger question in that, I guess. You may or may not be able to answer that, but any thoughts about the sort of the general scope of that question?
Yeah, and again, because it isn't something that I've experienced, so I wouldn't really be able to offer anything as sort of advice. But I think it's about kind of just finding those mechanisms which can kind of work for yourself in the short term, and then again, as more things kind of come obvious or become a bit more easier to understand or accessible, then utilizing them and then bringing them into the mechanisms. It took me a long time to work out how I was working with dyslexia as my main condition, and then what I kind of needed to do. So obviously with dyslexia you wouldn't have any medication associated with it, but it is just about kind of really again just self-learning, self-understanding, self-confidence, which will allow you to sort of do what it is you need to do, and it takes time. It does take time, and I think we've got to give ourselves credit as well at that point, that this isn't something where even on medication potentially that's going to take some time to normalize in the body, to then allow you to work to your full potential.
I think based on what you've both said, it's always going to be important for the employer to best understand the individual and be able to map what the individual is going to be sort of best geared up for against what it is that the employer is actually trying to get out of that situation. And the more that you can work on that alignment, I mean, looking at sort of Greg's question again, you know, in terms of task initiation, just lining up those things which you know are absolutely going to best suit that individual at that particular time in the process, but you need to know them first, don't you, Emily?
Yeah, so my advice is to work out what you're struggling with in task initiation. Are you struggling with motivation bridge, so you don't know where to start? Or are you struggling with the wall of awful, i.e. you've got a major issue because you've had a problem with it before, you know it takes you a long time, it's really difficult to do, and so therefore you're not going to do it, and you end up in a self-perpetuating cycle of a wall getting bigger and bigger until you have to smash through it. If you can identify which one of those two it is, you'll then know how to start. Because with motivation bridge, it's a little bit easier to go, well, okay, I just take this small step, I'll spend 20 minutes doing it, and then I'll then decide that my brain will then decide that it wants to do the next bit. If it's wall of awful, it's a slightly bigger problem, then you'll need to look into A, what the wall of awful means, but B, how to then get over it. What's your first step to climbing it? Because doing what we would like to do as ADHD people is wait until the last minute and then crash through it, just means the next time the wall's double the size and we're not going to go and do it again. So I would really analyze in your tasks what it is that you think is stopping you. One means you need more support, and the other you can break down a task even further to make it more doable. There is a fantastic book called The Anti-Planner, which is all about how to plan for being ADHD and what you can do, and gives you loads of different ideas about how to get through that and work out which segment it is that you're not struggling with task initiation. But that's my advice, is really work out the difference.
It's fantastic. I think you've said a lot more eloquently what I was trying to say a second ago, and that's certainly been my my personal experience. I mean, there's some great stuff that's gone into the chat that I believe is going to be pushed out to everybody as well. So thank you, Laura. You've put some information in, a little bit more information on access to work. I would personally say for any one of you, go onto the website, get your head around what that actually is, what it can be used for, and where you can get the benefits. We've only got time for perhaps a couple more questions. So let's take one from Stuart Hughes. I hope that's my colleague Stuart Hughes, President-elect, who's going to be hosting the next of these webinars. And Stuart and myself are working very closely together on this subject area because it's important to us both. So Stuart asks, how much as a profession are our messages not landing if we're not aware of or catering to neurodiversity in how we communicate, train, etc. across the spectrum of IOSH, and how do we address this if it is an issue? And I'll kick this one off, Stuart, because you and I have talked about this extensively, and I've also talked to Emily about this in the past. One of the reasons that I wanted to bring this to the forefront is because my concern is that if you are saying that between 15 to 20% of people out there are or could be neurodiverse, you've got 1/5 of people could be completely missed in terms of everything you're trying to achieve and include people in and communicate over. I don't think we actually know the answer to that question, which is why I'm really keen that we bring this to the forefront. But Adam, any thoughts on that question from Stuart?
Yeah, it's quite a troubling actual prospect, which you again, until the kind of questions is raised, I think we're just quite oblivious to it. It's like a time bomb that's going to go off at some point that we've kind of just ignored. It's been ticking, and then suddenly it'll explode. And I think in particular, I think if we've got the technology now, we should be utilizing it. We should be putting it out there to then deliver everything that we do. So if we've got long risk assessments, how do they go to text to speech? It's about kind of how do we use video? How do we use sound, podcasts, and cut things down, make them so that people, depending on how they learn and depending on how they listen and communicate, they can then take and actually do something with. And I think, as a profession, we've always been paper-based. We've always been quite, compliance driven, so that if it's not written down, then, we can't submit it to the HSE, for example, because, how do we prove something? And I think this is where we need to start really kind of actually thinking outside the box much more, which again comes back to, if we can get these employee groups off the ground, if we can support employees, then they're the people that we should be going to ask the questions, and we should say to them, what is it that you need from us to then deliver on, and then put things in place to kind of make that happen. And you know, we have got a lot of people probably in the health and safety profession. Again, if we use our stats of 15 to 20%, there's a fifth of the health and safety professionals out there who, you know, are kind of doing more and can do more. So we need to kind of learn from each other and then grow that out. So again, these kind of conversations through IOSH and the work that IOSH is doing, it's going to be fundamental to make that change happen.
Yeah, I think what this does is it illustrates once again the importance of making sure that the likes of the line managers in organisations are actually, you know, well educated, well prepared, and understand what they can do to actually help drive this agenda forward. And it's interesting that Kathy has made a comment in the Q&A as well about you know, what is it always the assumption that those who are neurodiverse have to do all the heavy lifting? For me, it should be the other. It should be the other way around. It should be the employer and the line management structure who understands that there is heavy lifting to be done, but it's just a natural thing that you do to get the best out of your people and help them thrive, right? And these are things we're all going to come back to. And listen, we've got loads more Q&A in there that we'll try and answer offline, but we're literally down to our last 5 minutes. And as you can tell, the three of us are absolutely enthused by this subject, and absolutely rightly so. But let me leave you just with one final question to both of our panelists, and you'd expect me to ask this. I mean, what is the one thing that you would say, the one key thing that you would say to people who are coming into new roles, or employers taking on new staff who are neurodivergent, based on what we've spoken about today? What's that one key takeaway? Emily.
I think for me, it's please don't be afraid. I think so many people are afraid of inclusion, of language, of what to do, knowing where to start, because all they can see is this giant mountain. I like metaphors if anyone's not worked that out already. But so my advice is please don't be afraid. Really just ask some open questions, just start talking about it, and you'll find that some support and help will come. I guess that's my takeaway.
That's fantastic. Thanks, Emily. Adam.
Probably very similar there. So it's embrace who you are, who others are. You know, again, we can all learn from each other. We can all balance each other out. Even if you're kind of, you know, class yourself as neurotypical, again, you have strengths and weaknesses. I don't like the word weakness, but, you know, we all have things that we struggle with. And again, it's how you can utilize other people to complement some of those things that you find more difficult or challenging. So again, there's people with lots of different strengths and, you know, creative thinking and all of that type of stuff. So if you are trying to do anything, then just do that. And I think this honestly is living with me, and I think, you know, to Stuart as well. It's about be bold, be brave, be happy, and those three things together, I think you can't go wrong.
No, that's wise words, Adam. I mean, you know, I say this at the end of every one of these webinars. An hour absolutely flies by, and we've got enough to talk about to keep us going till 3 weeks on Wednesday, which obviously we don't have. But listen, I'd like to say a huge thank you from me and from everybody, I'm sure, who's on the webinar today, to both of you for your contributions, Adam and Emily. You know, fantastic to get your personal insights. And obviously, thank you from me to everyone who's taken the time to come along. And I hope that, you know, you've taken away from today some really well, invaluable information that you can do something with and build perhaps on that first webinar. But please remember, this is part of a series, and you'll notice that there's a survey that's already popped up. We'd love to hear your thoughts and what you're taking away from today's session, because it helps us design those things for the future. And I think, you know, for me, today has just all been about you know, just the power of accepting that, you know, we are all different, and everything that comes with that difference makes us, you know, bigger, bolder, better in terms of our decision making, ourselves as a community, as a profession. You know, go and get educated, go and understand the basics, but remember, you won't be that expert because we are all different. But if you're a line manager, go and understand what the background of all this is, and only with that background knowledge can you start to have those basic conversations to support your team as best you can. And for me, that's just it's so important. So before I let you go, a reminder just once again about these other webinars. You'll have popping up in the screen in just a second if it hasn't done already. We're just bringing up the details of the next one, which is Tuesday, the 27th of June, same time, 12:30 UK BST. It'll be great to see you coming along and obviously, hopefully, sort of building on all that knowledge and everything else. So for that particular one, you know, as I've just said, we're all different. We all think differently. We identify, identifying and understanding an individual's qualities, and that difference is absolutely critical to bringing out the best in everyone. So Stuart Hughes, my mate and colleague on the presidential team, is also your president-elect of IOSH. He's going to talk to Gary Moynihan and Sharon Booth of Worcestershire County Council as they share their story on how they've actually worked together to get the best out of one another. And I'll let them tell your story, because Gary's someone I've worked with before, absolutely fantastic guy, and he's got lots of experience in terms of what it's like to be himself in that environment, and how the two of them have worked together to make his job so rewarding and impactful. And that's what all this is about. So you can register for that webinar and the rest of the webinars by scanning the QR code that's popped up. But if you have missed that for whatever reason, don't worry. You can find details on the IOSH website, and we'll email you those details anyway following the webinar. So, wow, there's an hour. So fantastic stuff. Listen, once again, massive thanks to Emily and Adam for your time today. I really hope to see you all again for the next instalment next time. So from me, I've been Lawrence Webb. Goodbye.